historically, project finance scheme we were knowing was developed around the energy, oil and gas sector through users' fee payment. New schemes started to develop in Australia and Canada favoring public-private partnership. We started to see them in schools sector, in universities, hospitals, solid and wastewater treatment plant, transportation, all the sector, social or economic, were affected by public-private partnership scheme. It hit the ground of all the sectors in those countries. It started to spread out with the UK public-private partnership scheme known as the Private Finance Initiative, launched by the Thatcher government, followed by the Major government, and ultimately this went to continental Europe, and France started to embrace this model in the early 80s, where now we can see a lot of public-private partnership in all the sectors, including economic, infrastructure sectors. Unlike Australia and Canada, unlike the UK or France, in the US the situation was fairly different. The market started to develop in the 70s thanks to the presence of a large and deep bond market and the presence of the rating agencies. Municipal entities in the US, namely the cities, the county, the states, and the local specialized agencies in charge of specific infrastructure, used to finance their infrastructure through the issuance of bonds. And the reason why they did that is because they had a large and deep bond market on which they could issue bonds for 20, 25, 30, 35 years in all the sectors: hospital, prisons, transportation. Rapidly, two types of bonds emerged. On one end, the revenue bonds, mainly what we know over here as user fee-based transaction, whereby the infrastructure is financed through the use of the bonds, those bonds being repaid by the revenue generated by the use of the infrastructure. Toll roads would be paid by the users' fees, and airports would be paid by the airport landing fees. This is the model we know as project finance. And beside this type of bonds, we had the general obligation bonds, also issued by the municipalities, but for the purpose of financing specific infrastructure, but not with the user's fee, with the tax, with their general taxing power, and the general taxing power being not necessarily earmarked to the infrastructure. So we know this model over here as the tax-based model. The divide between tax and user's fee transaction, this divide was clearly made by the fact that in the US, public finance was done in the form of issuance of general obligation bonds issued by the municipality, and these general obligation bonds were bonds that could be repaid through the taxing power of the authority, the so-called tax-based model. And beside this model, another model coexisted and still coexists, which is the revenue bond model, which we know in Europe as user fee-based model, where transportation, for example, was financed through the issuance of bonds that would be repaid by the users and the revenue paid by the users of the infrastructure. So you would typically be in a typical user-based transaction as we know over here or internationally. So this market in the US between revenue bonds and general obligation coexisted for more than 40 years, enticed primarily by a deep bond market, encouraged by the presence of the rating agencies and the insurance of AAA monoline insurers, and evolved recently in the light of the global financial crisis. Beyond geography, what motivates the adoption of a model are the following considerations. First and foremost, the fiscal policy position of the country in which you are. The more the budget is constrained, the more likely the infrastructure will go into public-private partnership schemes. The second consideration is about socio-economic conditions and socio-economic factors. You have countries where it is not possible to toll infrastructure. Typically, in Portugal, they renounced to toll infrastructure because the population was fundamentally against it. So they developed, as an alternative, the shadow toll system. Third consideration is the degree of development of the capital markets and the degree to which you can use local currency to finance your project. Take Chile as an example. In Chile, you are not only able to issue bonds in the local market, in the local currency for 20, 25 years, and finance your project through the private sector in a typical project finance user fee-based model.